Hello everybody, James here, episode 41 of Storytime with Dutch Mantell. Let's do a few plugs first. The World According to Dutch, a fantastic book. A great book.
Great book.
And Tales from a Dirt Road, a great book.
Great book.
And if you want them signed, you go to Dirty Dutch Mantell with 2 L's at gmail.com and you sort that out with the man himself. And also I've got 2 books as well, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, The People's Champion, great book, great biography written by yours truly, and Owen Hart, King of Pranks as well, which details over 160 of Owen's ribs, pranks, and other misdeeds, and also a full biography as well. And also, just while you're drinking your mug of whatever it is you're drinking there, Dutch, I can't help but notice how lovely your mustache looks today.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Do you use products?
I do, but I cannot release the names of these products until they contact me. So if there's any mustache companies out there who want to really advertise how well their product looks on a masculine face, you can contact me at Dirty Dutch Mantell, 2 L's, at gmail.com, or right here at the YouTube channel, and just send it to James and he'll get in contact with me. But I think some mustache company is missing out on this. Don't you think that's you think that's true, James?
Oh, definitely. I think so. You should have the mustache wax and I should have some sort of razor blade thing because, as I said just before, I couldn't grow a beard if you, I don't know.
Manscaped.
Gave me beard juice.
Oh, did I say that?
No, yeah,
Manscaped?
Sorry, I'll bleep that out. No money for you, that company that Dutch just said. Unless you pay us.
No money. Hey, I'm in a good mood today. I'm ready for some questions. So you ready to start?
I am ready to start. And the first one is actually from me. So when I was doing research for Jerry Jarrett, one of the things that stood out to me is, and when I say stand out, I've printed this somehow in a light purple colour on my page, so I'm really going to have to shove it in my face, is the loss of Jimmy Hart to WWF was as Lawler's perennial adversary hurt Memphis badly. They did draw good crowds after Hart left, including a few sellouts, but they were fewer and farther between. Hart noted that even though he wasn't used as a top manager and the catalyst heel in the WWF, he noted that he'd go out for multiple matches a night, this is Memphis, work 6 days a week, take big bumps for the babyfaces for $250 a week.
Okay, that was what I read that wrong. I thought, and that is true. You remember when I was talking, I think last week, that the business had just gone to nothing? Mm-hmm. I mean, you work 6 days a week. That's like $40 a day. That won't pay it could pay you gas, but you wouldn't have anything to eat on. Plus, Jimmy would have to go to Louisville or Evansville and stay over. So he was actually losing money. So, but there's one thing I can say about Jimmy. He never, like all the rest of us, we'd always bitch about money. Oh my God. Why are we even going to this stupid town? They don't draw shit. We're not going to make any money. So we would work ourselves into a negative attitude before we even left. But Jimmy, I can say Jimmy is the most positive guy, seriously, I've ever known. I mean, even if it's bad, he'd still find something to be up about. Maybe not the situation at hand, but he could be up about something else. The most positive guy I've ever met. And you could see it on his interviews. He was always up and, hey, baby, and do. It was Jimmy, love him to death, but him making $250 a week, I can believe. So what was the question?
That was pretty much it, really. $250 a week in 1985. And he is, if not the top bad guy in the promotion. I mean, he basically is.
Yeah. But when they brought somebody else in, say they would bring a Jesse Ventura in. Now, they brought him in before 1985 because after 84 was their last hurrah, I would say. And we did have some sellouts later on when I'd come back. We had a sellout with me and Dundee versus me and Lawler against Dundee and Landell. And in my book, I write about the last sellout in Memphis. Mm-hmm. And that was it. And Bill Dundee came back and disputed that. But I still think it was the last sellout that they ever had by the USWA or the Jarrett Promotion Company in the city.
86, I believe, as well.
Yeah, and I had left and come back, and then Landale had come back, and Dundee had come back. So we were all there at one time. And the way we told the story is me and Landale and Bill teamed up for this faction. And they were always talking bad behind my back and this, that, and the other. And then Lawler had worked to deal with Dundee at Loser Leave Town, which Lawler lost. So he had to leave. So then, about 2 weeks later, maybe 3 weeks later, business was horrible. You know, when you lose your top guy, Lawler, you know, he's needed badly. So we have to work a way to get him back, but he lost to Loser Leave. How are we going to do that? So Jerry Jarrett worked a way that they turn on me and ask me to get a partner if I can find one. And the only one I can find that I think would be suitable would be Jerry Lawler. But he's banned, and I called him up. And I happened to say that he was watching TV at home in Memphis, which everybody else was too. So that's a believable story. He wasn't at the TV. And even the promoter, Eddie Marlin, come out and said, I don't give a damn of Dundee Landale. Sue me if you want to, but I'm bringing in Jerry Lawler, and him and Dutch Mantell were going to face you Monday night. We sold it out. So we covered the part that why he couldn't come back because of the Loser Leave. We may get sued. Eddie Marlin said, I don't care. And that was one of the sellouts they've talked about. But they became, not sellouts became rare, but actually a good house became rare. See, Lawler lived in Memphis. And in the fall of the year, he was kind of absent because he's a Cleveland Browns fan, and he wanted to go to all their games that he could. So on the weekends, he might make TV, but then he's gone. He'd go to the game, and hell, you wouldn't see him today on Monday night. I mean, I wouldn't see him anyway because I didn't live in Memphis, but then when it come time to make it Louisville and Nashville and Evansville, like the fall of the year was his like vacation time. That's why Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler switched the book back and forth. Mm-hmm. And I kind of like that because, you know, neither guy had time to get burnt out, and they'd switch it back. Then, you know, I guess, and Lawler liked it that way because he could get his mind off wrestling and do other things, which is actually, when you think about it, is not a bad setup. So they had a good thing going. I liked it, and it did good business. As long as the company was in business and not battling WWF.
I want to ask you this then. So in this little sort of snippet, it suggested that the loss of Jimmy Hart to Memphis was far more devastating than I suppose anyone quite realised at the time. I mean, how big of a loss was Jimmy Hart at this time?
Oh, huge. He was the hype guy. He had a lot of good ideas, and he had been there. If he left in '85, he'd been there close to 9 years. I mean, he was an institution in the city. And I won't say he was over as much as Lawler because he wasn't a wrestler, but everybody knew who Jimmy Hart was. I remember Jimmy Hart telling me one time, he said, hey, when I go out on the street, people come up to me, you Jimmy Hart? Oh, yeah. Hey, baby, how you doing? He said, I'm as friendly as I can be because they don't pay me to work overtime. And I don't want to be fighting these bastards on the street. Except Jimmy never cursed either. I never heard Jimmy say son of a bitch. I never heard him say MFer or nothing like that. But he was always, even in the dressing room, he'd be up. I used to say, Jimmy, you need to get off that crack a little bit. I mean, you're just way too. But he never used drugs. Neither did Lawler, by the way. And Lawler never even drank a beer. I don't know if he's even drank a beer to this day. So, not that adds anything to anything, but I felt it a rarity that a guy in the wrestling business has never even had a drink of beer.
Sort of like the Gene Simmons of wrestling, because Gene Simmons has never drank a beer either, even though he's in the rock and roll business, which I always found funny. Just to add to this is that Jimmy Hart ended up going to the WWF at the suggestion of Hillbilly Jim. So he's got Hillbilly Jim to thank for sort of like topping up his paydays a little bit more when he was with the WWF. We're going to move on to the first of our fan questions now. And John says, hello, guys. I have a question for Dutch. Was it, and I can't believe we've gone 41 episodes without ever bringing this up. Was it a total pain in the ass to have so much damn back hair? I have some hair on my shoulders, back, arms, etc., and it was constantly irritating the shit out of me, or getting caught on clothing, my watch, etc. How did your body hair ever get yanked around while in a hold? Have you ever had someone grab a handful of your back or shoulder hair and given it a yank during a match, etc., etc.? But, I mean, did it hurt more when you hit the canvas?
When I hit the canvas? No, it didn't hurt more. But it is a pain in the ass. It really is. Because what I can do, I can like flip my front and my arms. I can kind of do that. But I don't have arms in the back. So I can't do my back. Now, the first time I ever really had a problem with it, I was young. I was breaking in, and I worked Jody Hamilton. He was one of the original assassins and was one of my childhood heroes. Plus, he was a big bastard. He's like 300 pounds. And I couldn't move him if I'd wanted to. You know, I talk about moving refrigerators. Well, two of those would be Jody Hamilton would be one. Abdullah the Butcher would be another one. I mean, you couldn't. They were just, if they wanted to stand their ground, nothing. I probably weighed 200 pounds or 205. I had him in a headlock, and Jody reached up with his hand and grabbed a big handful of hair and ripped it out. I went, damn. Oh, you like that? I went, no. Then he got another one. Oh, my God. It hurt so bad. I just turned him loose. And then every other time we'd lock up, and he'd reach back here, and I got hair all the way up here. He'd pull it off my neck. Oh, my God. And just a big handful. And he thought that was the funniest thing in the world. Of course, I couldn't let on to the fans like, oh, that's hurting me more than you punching me. So, and I looked on the booking sheet, and I had him the night after, too. That day, I became acquainted with some hair removal projects. Lotions called Nair. Never used it before in my life, but I used it. And had my wife, put it on my back. So, and he didn't notice. We locked up in the ring, and he said, headlock. I took the headlock, took me over, and then I felt. He said, you son of a bitch. I said, I can't take that, man. But yeah, it does bother me, especially two times it bothered me. Summertime, because, you're perspiring, and winter because of humidity, it's low. Therefore, it gets actually drier, and it hurts worse.
I am so happy that question. I can't believe after 41 episodes it took this long to bring it up. Jeff T says, do you have any stories or memories of Rocky Johnson coming into the Memphis territory in 1976 to play off the Muhammad Ali versus Antonio Inoki boxer versus wrestler match? Also, we were around in the late 80s when Rocky Johnson returned for his last significant run in the business. This is in Memphis, I believe.
No, the only time I was in Memphis was those two times he mentioned. I was not in Memphis. I do remember him in the probably 76, 77, 75 era when he came in. That's when the business was still in pretty good shape. And I'm sure they could have afforded him a guarantee that no matter what it drew, he was going to make the same money. But his last two times in there, he was older, heavier, and he didn't have the same sting as the Rocky Johnson in his prime. So I don't remember him the last two times that he mentioned. I do remember him the first couple of times. The first time I remember when he was riding with me one time, and he had a cigar. And in my car, it had like a cloth what's that thing over your head, the covering of the ceiling, and he lit it or something, and he went up and burned a big hole about that big in my ceiling, and he said, "Oh, I'll pay for it. I'll pay for it." Guess what? He never paid for it. So when I traded the car in a couple of years later, it still had that hole right in the roof. I call it the Rocky hole.
Did Rocky have a reputation of having many illegitimate children even back in the 70s? Because he seems to have dozens.
No, he didn't. I didn't know anything about him. Where I lived with Rocky was at a Days Inn hotel, motel that had monthly rates. And that's because you didn't have to sign a lease and you could leave at any time. You just paid weekly. And I remember The Rock, when he was about 3 years old, I remember him running up and down the hallway outside. And I'd look out there and he'd look at me and he'd see me and he'd run back down there. But that, and what was that question again?
Oh, just Rocky's reputation for seemingly having children everywhere.
Oh yeah, about the kids. No, I didn't even think he had any kind of relations with any women at all. Never saw him with another woman other than his wife. So I read that article about him where all of them were claiming that he was their dad, but I never heard of it to then. And it never crossed my mind, did he have any other kids? There was no reason for me to think of that. But then it came out, Rocky Johnson is my dad. Well, he's my dad too, and he's my dad. And judging from the number of mothers had, Rocky was quite active.
With Rocky, I'm presuming, so this is in 76, I think, when he was the boxer versus wrestler thing with Jerry Lawler. Do you remember that being a particularly big draw at the time?
I guess it was. Lawler was hot. And I don't know if they sold it out, but they had a good house. I remember that.
We will move on. Aussie Adam. G'day, mates. Adam from Australia here with a question about Monty Brown. He seemed like a surefire main eventer for TNA before leaving for WWE, then just leaving the business entirely. What did you think of him as a talent? Any good stories? Why did he leave wrestling and he never returned?
Well, I don't have any stories about him, but I do remember Monty. Very friendly guy. Great athlete. I think he played on two teams that went to the Super Bowl. And then he got traded to the other team the next year. He went to the Super Bowl. And I thought he had a lot of upside to him. And he got over in TNA pretty well. But then he had a chance, of course, to go to the mothership, the WWE. WWE. And he went, and I was highly disappointed in how they used him. This guy was a main event guy, good talker, good looking guy, great athlete. He seemed to me exactly what WWE was looking for. But yet when he got there, they gave him some kind of name. I forgot the name they gave him.
Marcus Corvon, which is sort of quite French sounding, isn't it?
And I never got it, why they gave him that name. And he lasted there, I don't know, not long, maybe, I'm going to say a year. He may have lasted more. I don't know. How long was he in WWE?
I'd suggest, I think that's about right. About a year. And then he had some sort of family issue where he just said, problems. I don't even know what the family problems were.
No, he had a sister. Something had happened to her legally. She was involved in a shooting or something. I think she was either arrested And he had a couple more sisters, younger sisters, and I don't know where their parents were or Monty's mother and father, but he went back. I think he was from Detroit or Michigan or somewhere, and he went back in order to take care of them, which is a noble reason for him to do that, to take care of his family. And Monty Brown, to me, if I saw him today, I would just start talking to him like I saw him last week, because he's a good talker. And I considered him a friend. And he had his upside in wrestling was, I thought he could go just as far as he wanted to go. I would like to see a Monty Brown and a Rock together right now, because I think they would fit. Because what's the name of Rock's partner in the movies? What's his name? The little short guy?
Oh, Kevin Hart.
Oh, yeah. He could have been to Kevin Hart before Kevin Hart, because he's funny. And, you know, I think The Rock and Monty would have got along well. But I think that's a missed opportunity for the wrestling business. But, of course, if he left it for those reasons to take care of his family, more power to him.
Yeah, I think you're right. I liked his finisher. I liked him. Absolutely. I thought he had tons of upside. I'm going to just tell you this. Saginaw, Michigan, you were right there. It was Michigan. And the two teams he played for were the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots. I
got it right?
Yes.
See, I didn't have to make anything up. See?
I didn't want
I knew he worked for, he wrestled, he played for two teams that went to the Super Bowl. So.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you in your flow there. Right, next question. Water Sundown. Many say that Bobby Heenan or Paul Heyman are the number one, I'm presuming manager, but they didn't put manager in, which is unquestioned, I would say. But is Paul Bearer underrated in that term? He was almost as great as Heyman, I would say.
Yes, different style. Totally different style. I mean, Paul could only do that one type of interview with The Undertaker, with the high-pitched voice, and he may be underrated in your book. He's probably not as high up in my category as he is yours. But I would say that Jimmy Hart is in those top managers too, and Cornette. If you're going to put Undertaker, I think Paul Bearer was beneath those four, because he was with The Undertaker. Of course, The Undertaker took precedence in any introduction, and they never really included Paul in any finishes other than to hand Taker something, or just to be there. And he was a mouthpiece, is all that he was. So I don't know what credentials or criteria you're using to rate him over Heyman and
Heenan.
Bobby Heenan. I'll get it right in a minute. Give me a couple of weeks. But those guys could talk. Heenan would probably be, him and Cornette, as far as talking. I think they're 1 and 2. And then I think Paul Heyman underneath that, and Jimmy Hart. Mm-hmm. I mean, anybody that can overlook these guys' achievements in the wrestling profession, I don't think they're can be counted on to give any opinion.
Did you ever see Paul Bearer when he was Percy Pringle?
Yes, I booked him.
Oh, did you really?
I booked him in Florida. I think his name was Percy Pringle. I booked in Florida in 1980, late 84. And that's where I left Memphis to go book the Florida territory, because Dusty, and I brought this up on this show before, Dusty had left and took everybody. Anybody that was anybody, he took them. He took Barry Windham, and he took, Magnum TA, and he took, several more. But when I got to Florida, it was gutted. I might as well brought an independent crew in there and started all over. So Michael Hayes came in to help me with the book, because he brought the Freebirds with him, and they were a hot team then. But he knew this manager from Louisiana named Percy Pringle. And, of course, his claim to fame was he's the heir to the Pringle potato chip dynasty. That was what it was. And so I brought him in there and started him. And he did a good job there. He did a great job. So how he got picked to be Paul Bearer, I'm not sure of that.
I can tell you is that he was, someone recommended him, and then he was actually an honest to goodness licensed mortician as well.
Yeah, he was.
So he was like, so when Vince McMahon heard that, I was like, gee, well, it's made to be. I believe when he was Percy Pringle as well, I think Paul has said this himself, is that, listen, I was an unabashed rip-off of Bobby Heenan.
Mm-hmm. Well, he tried, but I don't think nobody could beat Bobby Heenan.
No.
Bobby Heenan had so much bullshit about him. He was so entertaining just to talk to in the dressing room. And remember last week when I said that Jimmy Hart had, I may have said this week, I don't know, he was always up.
This was this week, yeah.
Oh, it was this week. Okay, so I get it confused. But he would talk in the dressing room like he talk out there on camera. That was Bobby Heenan. So if you sat down with him, say you went to a restaurant and you started talking to him, he'd just start talking the same way he would on TV. Not as loud, of course, but he was entertaining whether he was on TV or not. So I don't think Paul Bearer was ever that entertaining just talking to him, but he was good. But I think Heenan and Cornette and Jimmy Hart, they're 1, 2, and 3 in that. I even shoot Heyman down a notch.
Mm-hmm. I've got to ask this as well, and I can't remember if I've asked you this before, is one of the things that Paul Bearer was famous for bringing to the attention of the wider public was Undertaker's fear of cucumbers. Did you know this at the time?
Nope. I still don't know it now. Well, he was afraid of cucumbers?
Yeah, they used to put him in his gloves and in his boots and slip a slice of cucumber in his drink occasionally and watch him throw up.
Oh, God.
I hate cucumbers, but man, I mean...
You hate cucumbers too?
I can't stand cucumbers. They're disgusting. It's tortoise food.
How do you eat pickles?
With, lovely. Cucumbers, I can't stand cucumbers. They taste of nothing. They taste of water and a bit of grass. It's disgusting. I don't like them.
Well, I didn't know that.
Well, there you go.
At all.
Everybody knows, something about me and The Undertaker. We both hate cucumbers. Next question. DG, hey Dutch. When you went back to Puerto Rico in the early 90s, did you have any interaction with Jose Gonzalez? How did he treat you? Did you want to have anything to do with him after the Brody murder? Thanks, and by the way, it was here where I live in Harlan County, Kentucky, that Ron Wright's plane got burnt up.
Well, okay, first question first. Puerto Rico, Bruiser Brody got killed.
So this is after you returned a few years later. The wrestling business is just done in America, and you needed some money. You ended up going back.
I said a couple of times that the wrestling machinery, or the machine that we had known before, was gone. It's like the industry died. Unless you work for WWF or WCW, you just couldn't make enough money in the wrestling business to survive upon. The only reason I went back to Puerto Rico was because of lack of anywhere else to go. Because I would call WWE very hard to get in there. Plus, I was older, and I didn't weigh 260 pounds. So they were trying to. They said, if we figure something out, we'll call you. Which they would have if they had figured something out, except they didn't spend a lot of thought on me. WCW was the same thing. Just because people know you in the wrestling business doesn't mean you can get booked. I mean, it's up to other people to do this. And of course, WCW, I think I would have had harder time with them than I would have had with WWF, because at least they knew who I was. WCW, those people at CNN, they didn't never heard of Dutch Mantell because they weren't wrestling fans. But anyway, so when I went back there, the Brody thing happened in '88, and the only reason I went back is because there's nowhere else to go. So I worked a deal, and I went back, and Invader was there, and I had as much interaction with him as I possibly could get by on. Because I had nothing to say to him. He was an idiot to begin with. He was an idiot when I knew him before. He was still an idiot. And one night I sent him a finish from the dressing room, and the referee comes back and he said, "Invader, you know like a finish." I went, "Okay, tell him to do that." I give it to him, sent the referee over. He comes back about 5 minutes later. "Invader says, send another finish. He don't like a finish." That's twice. I didn't go the third time. I said, "You tell Invader this. Tell him to do whatever goddamn finish he wants to do, because I'm done with him. Tell him just do it and put himself over and get the hell out." And that's the way it stayed for about 6 months. Finally, I broke him down. One day he came up to me in the office. He said, "Why don't you use me more?" I said, "Why don't you goddamn cooperate?" I said, "Hell, you don't want to, all of a sudden you want to do your own finishes? Well, do them. I don't care, because I'm not involving you in anything that has to do with that main event. Because until you learn to work as a team. If you don't work as a team, do it yourself. Go take a shower and leave. That's all I want you to do." Because I couldn't get rid of him. Because I guess, but I went to Carlos Colon, who was the owner of Jovica, they wouldn't agree with me to get rid of him. So I just did nothing with him. Till I finally made him come to me. He wanted me to come to him because he was some big star. I'm not doing it. I'm not kissing his butt just because he drew a few houses down there. And he has a weird way of even looking at the wrestling business. And I was never a fan of his. I never liked working with him, to tell you the truth, because he believed his own publicity. And I just didn't like to work with him. And I had as least interaction or communication with him as I have anybody in the wrestling business. I had more interaction with guys in the first match than I had with Invader, because I didn't appreciate talking to him. I didn't like him. But I didn't like him before the Brody thing. So afterwards, he did nothing to change my mind. And somebody said, "Do you think he can be recharged?" I said, "No, he won't." "Why not?" "He's guilty." I said, "Well, American law has it that you can't be tried twice for the second offense.
Double jeopardy.
It's double jeopardy. Same thing in England.
We did have double jeopardy. We abolished it long ago.
Well, but he was never said he wasn't not guilty. I mean, he wasn't innocent. He was just not guilty because he pled self-defense. But he went in there with a knife. And then that night, I will never forget that night. And I hope I never relive another one like that.
No.
Because it was a crazy, crazy night.
I want to ask you this, and this is a very serious question, is when you went back in the early 90s, I mean, probably two questions, actually. One, I mean, did you have any moral misgivings about going back, even though there was nothing really, no money really to be made outside the two big companies at that time in the United States? And two, did you ever fear for your life when you went back down there, at least at first?
No, I never feared for my life, because I wasn't afraid of him. I mean, I don't think if he'd have said something, we would have, first thing I would have grabbed, I'd have looked around and grabbed me a knife. Because if he's going to have one. No, he never, I stayed away from him, only in the dressing room with witnesses around. But I never got afraid or scared when I was in Puerto Rico, because all that thing was, they're going to kill the guys. They're going to do. They weren't going to do that. I mean, they're not completely immoral bastards, because Carlos, he's actually a pretty good guy. Joe Vica, he's a cheap bastard, but I don't think he would have killed me. And I don't think Jose Gonzalez would have He better be glad he walked free from that. And the reason, you know why he walked free from that? This is just an offshoot of what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Brody was painted on TV as a crazy guy, a crazy man. And all those fans who got called as jurors on the jury, they were all fans. So they were looking at Brody as he's nuts because his gimmick was believable. When he'd go out there, yes, and throwing that chain around. Well, you know, normal people don't do that. But they couldn't separate in their head that he's not like that on the street, but they didn't know Bruiser. They just knew he was like 6'8" and 310 pounds or whatever, and no fat. And if he went toward those other Puerto Rican fans with that, or Japanese fans with that, throwing that chain around his head, yeah, people ran because he scared them. So when they're sitting on the jury, they put themselves in Invader's spot. And when he went in there, and then why he took a knife was for survival. He didn't know whether he was going to get mad and go off. But then again, another time, this is what I think clattered it the most. Brody was an American. He was from outside that little island. Invader was a Puerto Rican who was like somewhat of a national hero, or everybody knew him, not national hero, but everybody knew him. So when they sent the jury out to deliberate, guess how long they took?
Very, very little time.
About less than an hour. And they came back with the verdict, not guilty. And the way they presented it during the trial, Invader never claimed he didn't do it. He claimed he did it. He admitted, I did it, but I did it in self-defense. So legally, he was kind of covered, I guess. And the only two guys that know what happened in that dressing room that night, one of them is dead and the other's not talking. So we will never know what happened in that shower stall or that shower room in, was it Cogwas? I think it was Bayamon. Bayamon, I think. It was those two guys. And crazy night. I got to sleep about the next morning, maybe 5. I got up at 6:30, couldn't sleep. And that was the only time I had ever talked to Brody's wife up till about 6 months ago. I finally met her and talked to her. She called me that night in my room and wanted to know what was going on because somebody had called her and told her that Brody had been, I guess, stabbed. But I didn't try to put it to her that way. I said, yeah, there's been a little bit of an incident. So, and I think you should get to Puerto Rico as soon as you can. I didn't want to unduly alarm her unless she needed to know. But she caught the next flight from San Antonio. That's where they were living. And she came to Puerto Rico. And the first one she met off the flight was Abdullah. He was going to his flight. And he told her. But he told her in such a way, like he said, he's gone. He's gone. She said, what? He's gone. He's gone. What do you mean? I mean, that was like a blunt way to tell her. A blunt way to tell her. So, but that's what happened. I don't want to relive it, and I wouldn't advise it for anybody else.
Absolutely. We will move on then. And this question is a bit of a leading way of asking a question, quite frankly. Rob from New York, Fabulous Moolah. Do you think it is right that WWE has almost washed away her legendary career? Nothing has been proven from these jealous and angry women spreading lies about her, but WWE has taken it as facts and now never mention her or the her amazing contributions to pro wrestling. Do you think there will be a time when they get back to acknowledging the greatest woman in pro wrestling? If you don't agree she is the greatest woman in pro wrestling, who do you think that title goes to? So a big fabulous Moolah fan.
Moolah is she's a subject all her own. Where do you find out about people like Moolah? Because you don't meet guys that worked under her. You meet women who worked under Moolah. And some of the women who worked under Moolah weren't her biggest fans. Some of them didn't like her at all because she had a little bit of a tyranny about her employment of these girls. And they told some stories that I won't tell here. But what happened to Moolah is she got up in that cancel culture. And I do believe some stories that some girls were sent certain places to certain promoters because that promoter would use her and her girls quite a bit. And it was up to the girl to make the guy happy. I'm not going to say what that is, and if she didn't, and I've heard this from them, and if she didn't make him happy, if he didn't like it, she'd let the girl know. And the girl would probably be on thin ice, and she probably might let her go or send her to the hard runs they had to do. I mean, I never liked the way she had it set up. They all lived in Colombia and they all flew out of Colombia, I would imagine. That's where she's from. But I first started hearing about her when I was in the first 2 or 3 years I was in the wrestling business.
Really?
I started hearing about Moolah because I think the girls wanted somebody to talk to outside of their circle. So, and I was real young. They liked me. So, and they would start telling me these things about her. Not that I was so dumb then, I didn't know who Moolah was. I didn't know who owned what or how their system worked or anything. But in listening to just a couple of them, they would tell me, because they used to ride. They'd get a ride with me, or we'd go eat or something, and they'd tell me all these things. So Moolah, I don't have really a glowing endorsement of her. I didn't know her that well, so I'm not going to go on the record as saying that. But it's just what I heard about her, and sometimes that hearing about them wasn't good. And who do I think is the number one?
I believe it says, who is the greatest woman in pro wrestling history?
Mae Young. Really? I think she was one of the starters of wrestling. And I'm watching YouTube the other day for whatever reason. I'm just bored, I guess. And I see Kurt Angle and Mae Young in the ring, and she was managing somebody, I'm sure. I think I kind of remember when this happened, but she ran in. Well, she waddled in, and she was beating Kurt on the back like this, and he turned around like, what the hell? And immediately dumped down, picked her up, and gave her the dump. And she was 83 or 84 years old. Now, your bones are brittle at that time, but she took that bump. Then she took the bump off the top of something, in WWE by Bully Ray. Mm-hmm. She took that, the power bomb through a table, and it had to be 10, 15 feet down, but she took it. So anybody who can take that at 83 or 84, because they ask her, would she do it? And of course, she said yes, because Bully Ray took really good care of her, and Angle took good care of her. I mean, as best you can, but they're still hitting something. She was probably safer on the drop with Bully Ray than she was just being dropped down by Kurt Angle. But the fact she was 83, 84 years old, or whatever that was, if that don't make her number one, I don't think nothing will. And she was around when it just started. She tells stories way, way back. And, Moolah started as Slave Girl Moolah. And I forgot the guy that handled her. Do you know that?
Not off the top of my head, no. I can
Billy. And then she got with Billy somebody. He settled in Nashville.
Not Billy Wolf, is it?
I think Buddy Wolf.
I'll look.
Billy Wolf. Look up. Pause it and look up.
Okay, pausing. So it was Billy Wolf, Dutch. Carry on.
Yeah, and the reason I remember that, I think he settled in Nashville. I think he became a record producer or something to do with the music business. But that's when I first started reading about her. That was, wait a minute. Who'd we start off talking about?
Fabulous Moolah.
You can tell oh yeah, I can't remember these names. But they said, how long you had this dementia? I said, well, it's not really dementia. I just can't remember, because I had this when I was 6. I just can't remember people's names. I can remember faces, but not the name. So if you're like me, folks, you can't remember something, you're not going nuts. It's just that you're crazy.
You're probably not going nuts. You never know. 1 in 10 could always go nuts. We will move on. And No Name says, any Bob Backlund stories? In fact, where was the first time you met Bob, in fact?
Florida. Met him there. Because, see, Bob was very, very popular when he started, because he was an amateur shooter, and could take care of himself. And Eddie Graham in Florida liked that. He liked to have guys around him who could actually wrestle. Because when somebody says, oh, that wrestling's all fake, he'd invite them down to what they call the, not the armory, but I call it the dungeon, where they did TV. And I used to have a tape of a training session. They beat this one poor guy half to death. I mean, it's damn wonder they didn't get sued. But Bob Roop had him in there, and he wanted to be a wrestler, but he was calling the wrestling that they saw on TV fake. Now we just go like this. They said, nah, yeah, whatever. And we go on. Back then, if you said it was fake, it was fighting words. So they would invite him down to, I call it the dungeon, and beat the crap out of him. That's why Eddie liked what we call shooters. He liked guys who could handle themselves just in case one of those guys came along and had to be put in their place. That's why he had the Briscoes there. That's why he had Bob Roop there. He had all those guys who could really, really handle themselves. He liked amateur wrestling. So, and what was the question again?
Bob Backlund stories. Just while you were talking about that, I was looking for Bob Roop kicking that guy half to death. Yeah, but I can't find it. So yeah, Bob Backlund stories. Did
I send it to you?
No, I'm trying to look for it.
Oh, but it's probably on YouTube. But Bob Backlund was a AAU amateur wrestler, won some awards, and he was kind of he wasn't good at pro wrestling, but he was good at amateur wrestling, and he wasn't even a good interview. He looked like Howdy Doody, but he could handle himself in the ring. So, and that's where I first met him, because we used to have to go to Fort Myers, Florida every Tuesday. And Tampa ran every Tuesday. So I was in the territory about, 3 months before I ever wrestled I lived in Tampa. Before I ever wrestled in Tampa, they would send me to Fort Myers every week. And what I would do in Fort Myers, I started working a little angle. I forgot who was with Brian Blair, I think. And I kind of learned how to pace it because they said, well, they didn't want to put none of their top stars in Fort Myers. So they was just going to do an in-house angle that I did with Brian Blair. And we kept it going for about, 2 months. But we got the town up. Now, Ron Bass, who was there too, he was in Florida for a year. And after a while, he kept complaining about he was never in Tampa. And after a year, guess how many times he had made Tampa?
Go on.
0. Because they took the rib that Ron Bass was saying. He's gone now, rest in peace. And they said, well, we'll really rib you. We'll never put you in Tampa. And he left Tampa the first time in Florida, and he had never worked a town. Crazy.
Do you remember, because you were in the WWF with Bob in the mid-90s, and this was crazy Bob Backlund, Mr. Backlund with the bow tie and the suit and everything. Was that more Bob's real personality coming out there or not?
Oh, it was. He wasn't that crazy in the dressing room, but he could act crazy. Because I called him up one time because I was doing this deal with some company, and it was offering him, I forgot what it was now, and I forgot what he had to do, but they was offering $5,000, and I forgot what it was. And everybody else that I pitched this to said, yeah, fine, let's do it. Except him. I pitched $5,000 to him, and he said no. I said, well, why? He said, it's not enough money. I said, well, I'll tell him. So then I went back to him and I said, well, Bob said he would like to do it. It was a commercial or something, but he said, that's not enough money. They said, what you want? I said, I don't know. He didn't say. He said, all right, throw $7,500 at him. Got back on the phone the day after. I said, they're offering $7,500. No, I can't do it for that. I went, what? You can't do it for $7,500? And this was back in the day. Long time ago, like 20, 25 years ago. I said, well, what do you want? He says, well, 10 at least. And I went, 10? So I called him back and I said, I found out what he wanted. And they said, what? They said, 10,000. And he said, nah, we can't do that. Just tell him thank you, but we can't do it. And I called him back up and I said, they can't go 10. And he never tried to say, well, let's go back to 75. He said, okay, thanks, man. I hung the phone up. So he never did it. But I mean, I think he had made a lot of money in the real estate business and probably didn't need it. So somebody just turned out on a day's work, 10 grand. Okay. If you can do that, fine. So if he can turn it down, he damn sure don't need it. So I'd have done it and tried to do it the day after. I said, let's do it again. But he was a good guy, and but a little bit odd.
I think we've got time for maybe 2 more. So Gary Lynch, hello Dutch and James. In the 70s, after leaving All South Wrestling, Dutch wrestled Georgia Championship Wrestling as Wayne Cowan. Where would you get a name like Wayne Cowan from? And Gino Hernandez came in as a rookie for a brief period of time. Also, Tully Blanchard would wrestle here for a brief of time, he writes, in his rookie year as well. I remember Dutch wrestling Tully in my hometown around 1977. Does Dutch remember anything about Tully or Gino in their rookie years?
Where was this guy? Where's he from? He doesn't say, does he?
No, All South Wrestling. I don't even know where that is. Is it like
All
Texas
South,
way?
Georgia, I think.
Okay.
And Mid-South was Louisiana and Oklahoma. I met him. I met Gino in Florida. Probably my first run here, I think. Now, I didn't know anything about him other than he was from Houston. And then he went back and became a big star in Texas wrestling. And there was a rumor about him that who was the promoter of Houston? What
Paul
was his
Bosch,
name?
He was the dad.
There was a story about Gino that Paul Bosch was his dad. I've checked that out and I can't find anything like that. But he was kind of crazy in Florida and then went to, have you ever read up on Gino?
Bits and bobs. He died very young, and there were theories going around that he was murdered at one point, I think.
Well, I think he got involved somehow. Remember my line, never let facts get in the way of a good story? Mm-hmm. This is what I heard. I heard he got involved in some drug deals, some drug trafficking, I guess you would call it. And he was always very paranoid. Not when I first met him, because he was just drinking then. But later on, he was very paranoid about looking out windows and, doors, and he was always looking around. But I don't know where he died, but I think he died in an apartment in Houston, I think. And he'd been dead a couple of days before they found him. And it says that they couldn't find any foul play, and said he died of a drug overdose, which he was doing drugs then, I heard. So, but any stories about Gino other than that, I don't know a lot of stories about him. Tully was a football player, and he was out of Texas too, kind of around the San Antonio area. And his dad was a promoter. And he got started, and finally he went back to, I think, San Antonio probably after 75. I don't have a year on it. But they had a pretty successful territory out there for a while. They did well. Ricky Morton was out there, and I went out there for like 3 weeks one time just to check it out, and then went back to Memphis. So, but wasn't a bad territory. It was easy to work. So the Tully stories come into motion when he was in Mid-Atlantic. And he got so, I heard, this is again, don't let facts get in the way of a good story. I don't know, but I think he got so into drugs that it was almost you couldn't work with him. And then, glory to God, he got religion and turned into an evangelist. So you've never heard my theory about organized religion and wrestling, have you? You have.
We've talked about religion and wrestling. They've got quite a lot of similarities when it comes to evangelism. Yeah.
Well, I think Tully, when he kind of got straightened out, he made some revivals as a speaker, and the people kind of liked him. And then I think he got with a guy who said he could. You're paused for some reason.
Oh, hang on one sec. Sorry, slight pause there. So Tully Blanchard made some revivals.
Well, and of course they would advertise him because Tully Blanchard was a pretty big name in the area at the time. So, and this would attract some fans who wouldn't normally go to a revival meeting, but they went to hear to see what Tully has got to say. And of course, a lot of it had to do with him getting in the evil, wicked world of pro wrestling and the sinfulness of it and the parties they used to have, and somebody heard it and they liked it, and now they wanted to book him for another one. And it was always funny to me that, and this is when I first worked my theory of wrestling and organized religion, like in revivals, how similar they are. You know, you draw a crowd, they're fans, they're followers, you have music, sometimes you have lights, you know, you have they don't buy tickets, but they take the offering, and you got a star talking or a superstar talking. Of course, the church had God in Jesus, and
at the top of the bill.
At the top of, I mean, you can't top that. But a lot of guys went into that. Ted DiBiase became a preacher, and then Tully became they didn't become preachers, they become evangelists. And then Tully, then Jake the Snake, imagine that, becoming an evangelist, and there have been a few more. So I'm wondering, all they got to do out there is saying how lost and out in the wilderness they were till they found God, and then God brought them to the light, and now here they are. So, and that may not be telling a lie, but I think it's stretching it somewhat. The lights they were seeing was so they were so high on coke that see some flashlights and all, it just explodes in their face. But to me, I could never ever do that. But because I'm not religious anyway. But even if I was, knowing I was, you know, that's a scam, and I just couldn't. You know, one day they may be a day of judgment, and when you come in front of God, He says, "You know, Dutch, that time you posed as that preacher and tried to preach the gospel. What do you got to say about that?" And I'd have no answer. Then straight to hell, where I'd go.
I hear that God, in certain circumstances, does really good payoffs, though. Well, if you're a really good evangelist.
If I went straight to hell, you know the first thing I'd say?
What's the payoff?
No. Oh. Turn on the fucking air conditioner. It's hotter than hell in here. That's what I'd say.
I promise you one more question.
That is not funny, James.
What?
No. Now you might burn just for that, laughing at that joke. But wait a minute, I gotta go.
We're gonna do one quick last question as promised, and Shootermania asked quite a long time ago as well. Why is the leg slap for the super kick getting so much backlash nowadays, but stomping the mat while punching is still acceptable? Isn't it the same thing?
No, it's not the same thing. Using your foot in one and leg in the other one. But yeah, it wouldn't be so noticeable if guys didn't do it 15 times at a match. My God. That's the only thing I can say. You know, you throw this is how a wrestler used to tell me when it was time to quit wrestling. When you pull the kick and throw the punch, that's when it's time to quit. when you get them confused. So I don't know why. I don't know what backlash the slap on the leg is. Why is it a big backlash now?
I think it was some time ago, yeah. But I think it's a Young Bucks thing. They throw so many super kicks and they throw just as many slaps on the leg.
But I did watch them the other night, and they didn't throw nearly as many kicks. I think they're watching the show. I think they are. But that is a legit thing to bring up. See, it would work better if they just threw one to stun the guy and one to beat the guy. But see, not everybody else. See, we used to have this. If I had a move, nobody else did it. Because I never had a move other than lay it on my...
No, you did. The short clothesline. The short clothesline that Jake stole off you.
Yeah, that And then he turned to be a preacher. What the hell? The thieving bastard. He stole my deal. And he'd probably tell you that too. And I still remember it, Fort Worth. And you told me it was his first match.
I think someone told you that, but maybe it was his first, like, in a recognized territory, maybe.
Well, not the first match. Yeah, it's not the first match.
Yeah.
First match in a recognized territory, yes. So then he not only steals my short clothesline, and then because he had a bigger platform than I did, it becomes his, and now he's preaching the gospel and going on. Mm-hmm. So, did you ever meet Jake?
I've never met Jake. I'd like to. He's got a podcast as well somewhere.
He is intriguing to talk to because he has that voice, and if he looks at you, hell, the next thing you think he's going to damn stick a knife in your heart or something, the way he's talking. I got to tell you this. One time I was somewhere. And when I say somewhere, it's because I can't remember. But I was in my run with WWF in 1995. They had brought him back. No, 96. I was with Bradshaw. I do remember this. And he was sitting over there talking to a bunch of, like, they called jobbers. Then they called them enhancement talent. But they were all sitting around the floor like, we're going to listen to Uncle tell us stories when we get around the campfire. Uncle Jake, tell us. He's telling this story, and I'm just far enough away from him that I can't quite make out what he's saying. But then I start, getting a little bit closer. He's telling the story. He says, guys, I was driving a 1995 Corvette something, convertible. And I was going down I-85, I-75, right through the middle of Atlanta. And he said, I'm doing 110 miles an hour. I said, damn. Now this end. He says, then he went more. He said, I had this prostitute sitting beside me. Well, that just increased it, 50%. What the hell? And she was naked. What? Going down through Atlanta, 110 miles an hour in a Corvette convertible with a naked prostitute. Have I told this story before?
Yes, but I don't think you finished it. I know this bit. I don't know the next bit.
And she had a vodka bottle or something, and said she had it between her legs. And said she was doing with it, he said what she was doing with it. I won't say it here. But she was using it on herself. And those guys were like this, God, really? You did this? He said, yeah. And then all of a sudden I'm riding down there and she's looking at me. And then she said, I had some Coke there. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, Coke and a convertible don't go quite together. But he said, I reached down and got me some Coke. Well, the story's getting better. Now all of a sudden he says, I don't know what it was. Something just told me to get off the interstate. And he said, the next exit I come to, I break it. And he said, I was about 4 cars back from the top. And guess what was at the top of it? It was the state police, and they were stopping cars and searching them. I said, but damn, how's he going to get out of this? Now he's hooked me. I'm over there like this, and the guy's talking to me over here. I was going, oh, get away. I got to hear this. And all the guys said, wow, what'd you do, Jake? What'd you do? He had them. He said, I got to the top, and the cop looked at me and looked at the woman, and he says, Jake, get out of here. He said, get out of here. Go now. Go, go, go. And he says, he let me go, and I went down the road. And I don't guess they arrested him or nothing, because that's when the story ended, or they called him for something, but that's as far as the story went. And if I see him again, and I have seen him again, I've asked him about that story, and he doesn't remember the story. I went, well, I'll be damned. Make up something anyway. But he didn't.
You've only told me the first half of that story, and you stopped before the vodka bottle.
Oh, I did?
Yeah.
Oh.
That was the best bit.
That's what she was doing. She was naked. She was a prostitute. He was in Atlanta with all the drugs. You know how Jake said he found drugs in Atlanta or any town?
Go on.
This could be, you may have to blot this out. He said, I looked for Martin Luther King Boulevard. I said, and if Peter said it now, I said, that's racist as hell. He said, well, that's where it is. So he said he would go down there in the black part of town, or a lot of blacks around, and they'd love him. Jake the Snake. They loved that shit. And he said, I was never in any danger there. I was a big star. He said, hell, they do anything. You know, they just wanted to sit around and bullshit a while, and then I'd leave, take a picture or something. Then he'd leave, which is one of the, I guess, the side advantages of being in bad side of town, but they know you. So they're not going to rob you or try to shoot you or anything, but great story. So
I derailed you from your original thought there of something about stealing moves, but we were talking about the Young Bucks and the leg slap. I don't know if you...
Yeah, well, I had finished that. I thought we were done with it. But this is the same way we would talk going down the road. Hell, if I don't finish the topic, well, hell, I just forgot about it. I've been hit on the head a couple of and in a car of wrestlers or just another wrestler, you're just talking. You know, you're just... So if you want to know something, you have to re-ask it. As for the Bucks, great. It is a great kick. But it would be much more effective if they used it less often. But once they've trained themselves to do this, that may be... Untraining is harder than training. So it may be a habit by this time.
I know I said this was the last question. I've just got to follow up with this. Did you ever get into the when you punch and you hit your belly at the same time? Because I've heard that quite a few times as well.
No. How you do that? Oh, I've got to do it. It's a punch like this, and then...
Yeah.
What I would like to see is, what if you threw the punch and hit your belly, but all of a sudden you sewed your belly? You went, oh, God damn, that hurt like a son of a bitch. Oh, shit, I got to quit that. That's what I would like to see. Or you throw the kick and slap your leg or whatever, and then, but you go, oh, then you start limping around, you hit your leg too hard. You never see that. But I think it would be great if you did see that.
I think you've probably given PWG, you know, that indie thing where they do all the dancing around, sticking the thumbs up each other's arses and like doing a human caterpillar around the ring. I think you may have given him their like next booking idea.
Wait a minute. The human caterpillar with the...
The human centipede, sorry, is what I meant to say.
Well, I've seen that, but not in a wrestling ring. I've seen that.
I think for now we need to shut this podcast down. We've arrived at the town. We've arrived at... where were we going to? It was Atlanta from where?
That was the last one.
Okay. Well, it's taken a week for us to get there.
Yeah, okay. We're in Oklahoma City. That's where we are. So have you enjoyed the trip?
Yeah. My body doesn't ache at all. I'm looking forward to getting out for a nice walk and stretching my legs, but otherwise it's good.
One of the things you look for if you had to travel all these miles is a good talker to travel with. And that made maybe why I didn't have a hard time getting rides with guys. Because I didn't like to drive, but I would make them overlook that fact by entertaining them the whole way. See, the talking really didn't start so much until the way back. You get a few beers in the passenger, a few beers in the back, and then they start talking, and that's where I learned the business, as I listened. And even though these guys are maybe a little half tanked, but still they had some entertaining stories, really. So listen, I want to announce this, that coming up, I talked to Jacques Rougeau, and he has agreed to come onto the show because he has something that's really highly interesting, and it's taking place in the country of Canada. Hopefully, we can have him next week, maybe. And I talked to Jimmy Hart, who would like to come on if it doesn't interfere with his schedule. And I would be looking for those two coming up shortly because I think they would be great interviews. Now, you've had Jacques before, right?
I've had Jacques before, yeah. I think that was the first year he was doing it. It's like a Canadian tournament, so he's trying to get like all the young indie talent around Canada, and they have like a big tournament and a big... and
he's doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's actually a pretty good premise. It's a pretty good... he wants to have them in a nationwide competition.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the way he described it is actually pretty good, pretty exciting. And you've had Jimmy before, right?
I've never had Jimmy before, no.
What?
No, I'll tell you the story. I meant to tell you this last time. I'll tell you the story why not afterwards. But so hopefully we're going to have Jimmy Hart on soon. Hopefully we're going to
So you're not going to tell it right now?
No, I like teasing stories and then not telling them on the air, but I will tell you afterwards. Okay, right. But for now, thank you very much, everybody, for watching. We've all got books, and there's a T-shirt out somewhere as well. Links are all in the description. But for now, thank you very much for watching. We'll catch you again next week, and we the people Dutch.
See you.